The morning sun filtered through the tall pines as Mike took another sip from his water bottle. The forest smelled of earth and pine needles, a welcome change from the scent of gunpowder and sea salt that had filled his nostrils for so many years. 3 years had passed since he'd left the Navy SEALs behind, trading military precision for the quiet rhythm of mountain life. The trail he chose that Friday morning wasn't on any tourist maps. Mike preferred it that way. Fewer people meant fewer questions about the scars on his arms or the distant look that sometimes clouded his eyes. His cabin near the Cascade Mountains had become his sanctuary, a place where nightmares gradually faded and where no one expected him to be anything other than the quiet guy who sometimes helped fix things at the local hardware store. He paused at a ridge, taking in the view of valleys stretching toward the horizon. This peace was what he'd fought for, though he never expected to enjoy it alone. The divorce papers had arrived just 6 months after his discharge. His ex-wife said she couldn't compete with the ghosts he brought home. A flash of color caught his eye, something bright against the natural browns and greens of the forest floor about 50 yards ahead. At first, he thought it might be trash left by careless hikers, but as he drew closer, the shape became clearer. A person in a blue jacket slumped awkwardly against a large boulder. "Hey!" Mike called out, quickening his pace. "You okay there?" No response. His walk became a jog, then a sprint. Years of training kicked in as he scanned the surroundings for threats while closing the distance. The man was breathing but barely conscious, his face pale and drawn with pain. A hiking boot had been removed, revealing an ankle twisted at an unnatural angle. Worse, just below the knee, a bone had broken through the skin. A compound fracture that needed immediate medical attention. "Can you hear me?" Mike gently tapped the man's face. The hiker's eyes fluttered open, confusion giving way to relief at seeing another human. "Thank God," the man whispered, his voice raspy from dehydration. "Been here since yesterday, I think." "I'm Mike. What's your name?" "Tom," he managed between wincing breaths. "Fell from up there." He gestured weakly toward a steep section of ridge about 30 feet up. Mike handed Tom his water bottle, helping him take small sips. "What were you doing out here alone?" Tom coughed slightly. "Needed to clear my head. Work stuff. Thought a weekend hike would help." He attempted a smile that looked more like a grimace. Bad decision, turns out. Checking his phone, Mike confirmed what he already suspected: no signal. Night would fall in about 5 hours, and they were at least 15 miles from the nearest road. Tom's condition would only worsen without proper medical care, and carrying him out would take far too long. "Listen, Tom, that leg needs a hospital. I've got some first aid training. I'm going to stabilize it the best I can, but we need to get you proper help." Something in Tom's eyes caught Mike's attention, a flicker of recognition, perhaps. But in his current state, Mike dismissed it as just pain and confusion. As he reached for his pack to retrieve his first aid kit, Mike felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders again. For 3 years, he'd avoided situations where lives depended on his decisions. Now, as he began cutting away Tom's pant leg to better assess the wound, he realized some skills you never really leave behind, whether you want to or not. As Mike gently cut away the fabric around Tom's injured leg, something changed in his posture. His movements became more precise, his breathing steadier. It was like watching someone slip into an old, familiar uniform. The scattered thoughts that usually filled his mind narrowed to a single channel. The man in front of him needed help, and Mike knew exactly what to do. "This is going to hurt," he warned Tom, his voice calm but firm. "But I need to clean the wound and set the bone as best I can." Tom nodded weakly, gripping a stick Mike had given him. "Do what you have to do." Mike's hands moved with surprising gentleness for their size. He cleaned the wound using water from his canteen and antiseptic wipes from his first aid kit, not enough for a wound this serious, but better than nothing. As he worked, he kept talking in a steady voice, partly to distract Tom, partly to keep him conscious. Had a buddy in the teams who stepped in a hole during a night training exercise. Snap just like that. Carried him 3 miles back to base. Mike carefully aligned the broken bone as Tom bit down hard on his sleeve. "Sorry, almost done with the worst part." Using branches from nearby trees and strips torn from his spare shirt, Mike fashioned a splint for the leg, It wasn't pretty, but it would keep the bone from shifting. Next came the challenge of dehydration. Tom hadn't had water since sometime yesterday, and the signs were clear: dry lips, sunken eyes, confusion coming and going. Small steps, Mike instructed, holding his canteen to Tom's lips. Too much at once will make you sick. As he worked, Mike's mind calculated their situation with military precision. They needed shelter before nightfall. The temperature would drop at least 20 degrees. Tom was showing early signs of shock, and the risk of infection was growing by the hour. Without antibiotics, even the cleanest field dressing wouldn't hold infection at bay forever. "We're going to stay here tonight," Mike explained as he gathered materials for a shelter. "I can't move you safely in the dark, and I need to figure out our best extraction plan." Using his emergency blanket, some paracord, and branches, Mike constructed a small shelter that would protect them from wind and any rain. He carefully moved Tom inside, elevating his injured leg on his folded jacket. "You military?" Tom asked suddenly, his eyes a bit clearer after hydration and rest. Mike nodded. "Was. Not anymore." "Could have fooled me," Tom said with a weak smile. "You got that look. My brother was Army. I recognize it." As darkness fell, Mike built a small fire close enough to provide warmth but positioned to minimize smoke. The dancing flames cast shadows across Tom's face, revealing lines of pain despite Mike's efforts. Every 30 minutes, Mike checked Tom's pulse, the temperature of his extremities, and his level of alertness, a routine as ingrained as clearing a weapon. In the quiet hours after midnight, Tom's condition worsened. Fever set in. A bad sign that infection was taking hold despite Mike's careful cleaning. Tom drifted in and out of consciousness, occasionally mumbling about people and things that made little sense to Mike: equations, deadlines, something about the project, and someone named Director Wilson. "My wife," Tom murmured during one lucid moment, his eyes finding Mike's in the dim firelight. "She doesn't know where I am. Told her I needed space to think." A ragged breath. "Stupid, right? Might die on a mountain because I couldn't talk to my own wife." Mike squeezed his shoulder. "You're not dying on my watch." As the first hint of dawn lightened the sky, Mike made his decision. The satellite phone in his pack, a relic from his service days that he kept charged out of habit, was their only chance. He'd avoided using it for 3 years, knowing the call would connect him to a life he'd walked away from. But as he looked at Tom's ashen face, he knew some choices weren't really choices at all. The satellite phone felt heavy in Mike's hand. He walked a few yards from the shelter to make the call, wanting to spare Tom from hearing the conversation. His thumb hovered over the power button for several seconds before he finally pressed it. The device beeped to life, the screen glowing blue in the early morning light. There was only one number programmed into the phone. A direct line he promised himself he'd never use again. 3 years of silence was about to end. Mike took a deep breath and pressed call. It rang twice before a gruff voice answered. "Authentication code." "Sierra Tango 95 Delta," Mike replied, the sequence coming back to him as easily as his own birthday. "This is," he paused, almost using his call sign before catching himself. "This is Mike Adams. I need emergency extraction for a civilian with life-threatening injuries." A long pause followed. "Adams? Well, I'll be damned. Hold for verification." While he waited, Mike glanced back at the shelter where Tom lay. The morning sunlight revealed just how pale the man had become overnight. If help didn't arrive soon. "Adams, you're verified." The voice returned, softer now. "It's good to hear your voice, son. Commander Reynolds here. Location." Mike rattled off the coordinates from his GPS device, then described Tom's condition in clear clinical terms. Compound fracture of the right tibia, signs of infection setting in, possible internal injuries from the fall. Civilian, mid-30s, no identification on him. "What's his name?" "Tom. That's all I've got. Found him yesterday morning after he fell from a ridge." The line went silent for a moment. "Repeat that name." Something in Reynolds' tone made Mike's neck hair stand up. "Tom." He didn't give a last name. Physical description. About 6 feet, lean build, dark hair going gray at the temples, wire-rimmed glasses that survived the fall somehow. "Why? Do you know this guy?" Another pause. "Stay put. Keep him stable. Extraction team is spinning up now." should reach your position in approximately 5 hours. And Adams? Don't let him out of your sight. Before Mike could ask any more questions, Reynolds continued with unusual intensity. This line isn't secure for details, but if this is who I think it is, you stumbled onto something big. He may have people looking for him, and not the good kind. Keep your situational awareness up until my team gets there. The call ended abruptly, leaving Mike staring at the phone. The familiar feeling of adrenaline began coursing through his veins, not the panicked kind civilians get, but the controlled alertness that had kept him alive through 3 combat tours. He tucked the phone away and returned to the shelter, studying Tom with new eyes. The man didn't look like anyone special, just an injured hiker who'd made a bad decision. But Commander Reynolds' reaction told a different story. Help is coming, Mike told Tom as he checked his bandages. Should be here in a few hours. Tom's eyes fluttered open, clearer than they'd been since yesterday. You called someone? It wasn't a question. Friend with access to a helicopter, Mike said carefully. Better than trying to carry you down the mountain. Tom's gaze held his for a long moment. Thank you. Then more softly, who are you really? Just a guy who happened to be hiking the same trail. A weak smile crossed Tom's face. Right, and I'm just a guy who came up here to think. He shifted slightly, wincing. We both know that's not the whole story, don't we? Mike checked Tom's pulse while considering his response. Sometimes the simple version is easier. Not this time, Tom whispered. His hand suddenly gripped Mike's wrist with surprising strength. Listen carefully. If they come. He broke off, looking past Mike's shoulder with sudden alarm. Mike turned, following his gaze. Nothing moved among the trees, but the birds had gone silent. In the mountains, silence was rarely a good sign. What is it? Tom asked, his voice barely audible. Mike reached slowly for the hunting knife at his belt. Probably nothing, he lied. But I'm going to take a look around. Don't try to move. As he slipped out of the shelter, Mike's mind raced. Reynolds had mentioned people looking for Tom. Had they already found them? And more importantly, who exactly had he been caring for through the night? Mike moved through the forest like a shadow, each step deliberate and silent. The skills he'd spent years trying to forget came rushing back. He kept low, using trees as cover, his eyes constantly scanning. Something felt wrong. The forest was too quiet, as if holding its breath. After circling the perimeter about 50 yards out, he spotted them. 2 men in hiking gear that looked too new, too perfect. They weren't moving like hikers, they were moving like hunters. One carried what looked like a regular backpack, but Mike recognized the slight bulge of a concealed weapon. His mind raced through options. The helicopter was still hours away. Tom couldn't be moved quickly, and in his condition, he wouldn't survive a firefight. Mike had only his hunting knife and years of training against what appeared to be professionals. Making his decision, Mike circled back to the shelter using a different route. He slipped inside to find Tom awake and alert, his eyes questioning. We've got company, Mike whispered. 2 men approaching from the east. They're armed. Tom's face drained of what little color remained. They found me. He struggled to sit up. Listen, you've done enough. Get yourself out of here. This isn't your fight. Mike pushed him gently back down. Not happening. Tell me who they are. Tom hesitated, then spoke in rushed whispers. I'm not just some hiker. I work for the government, Advanced Research Division. The project I'm on, it's important. Very important. These people want what's in my head. He tapped his temple weakly. I didn't just come up here to think. I came up here to hide while I figured out who to trust. And the fall was real. Bad timing. A ghost of a smile crossed Tom's face. Or good timing, considering you found me. Mike nodded, processing this information. Help is coming, but we need to buy time. Can you move at all? Tom grimaced. Maybe, not far. I need to get you somewhere more defensible. The shelter's too exposed. Mike looked around, mentally mapping the terrain he'd just scouted. There's a rock formation about 20 yards south. Better cover, only one approach. Whatever you think is best, I'm not exactly in a position to argue. With careful movements, Mike helped Tom to his feet, or rather foot. The injured man bit his lip to keep from crying out as Mike supported his weight. Together, they moved slowly through the trees, Tom hopping awkwardly, leaning heavily on Mike. Every few steps, Mike paused to listen. The men were being careful, but not careful enough for someone with Mike's training. They were getting closer, moving in a search pattern that would eventually find the abandoned shelter. After what seemed like hours but was only minutes, they reached the rocks. A natural formation created a small alcove, shielded on 3 sides. Mike eased Tom down into the space. "Stay here. Don't make a sound." Mike pulled a small metal object from his pocket and pressed it into Tom's hand. "Emergency beacon. If something happens to me, press this button. It'll lead the rescue team straight to you." Tom looked at the device, then back at Mike. "Why are you doing this? You don't know me." Mike paused. It was a fair question. 3 years ago, he'd walked away from battle, from duty, from everything that had defined him. He told himself he was done saving the world. "Old habits," he finally said. Then, more honestly, "Because it's the right thing to do." Before Tom could respond, a twig snapped nearby. Mike melted into the shadows of the rocks, positioning himself where he could see without being seen. The 2 men appeared at the abandoned shelter 60 yards away. One knelt to examine the medical supplies Mike had left behind. The other spoke into a radio clipped to his shoulder, his words too distant to hear. What was clear was their reaction when they realized their target had moved: anger, urgency, and a new intensity to their search. Mike watched them confer, then split up to cover more ground. One headed in the completely wrong direction. The other started walking straight toward the rocks. Taking a deep breath, Mike made his decision. He couldn't outrun them, not while protecting Tom. He couldn't hide indefinitely. That left only one option, the one he'd hoped to avoid. He would have to become the hunter instead of the hunted. Mike retreated deeper into the shadows as the man approached. From his hiding spot, he could see everything. The way the stranger moved with practiced caution, the earpiece barely visible beneath his hair, the slight bulge under his jacket that wasn't just a water bottle. This was no random hiker. Glancing back at Tom tucked safely in the rock alcove, Mike knew he needed to lead the danger away. He picked up a small rock and tossed it far to the right. The soft clatter was enough. The man instantly turned toward the sound, hand moving inside his jacket. Mike used this moment to slip around behind the rocks, circling wide. His boots found each step carefully, avoiding twigs and loose stones. The old training flowed through him: breathe slow, move between heartbeats, become part of the forest. The pursuer reached the spot where Mike had thrown the rock, crouching to examine the ground. He was good, professionally trained, but his focus was on finding an injured scientist, not spotting a former Navy SEAL moving through his element. Mike closed the distance silently until he was just 15 feet behind the man. He stepped on a twig deliberately. The man spun around, startled to find someone so close. His hand went for his concealed weapon, but froze when he saw Mike standing there calmly, hands visible. "Looking for someone?" Mike asked, his voice casual as if they'd met on a regular hiking trail. The man recovered quickly. "Yeah, actually. Friend of mine got lost up here yesterday. You seen anyone?" "Funny thing," Mike replied, taking a single step forward. "I've been camping here 2 days. Haven't seen a soul except you and your buddy. Strange place to lose a friend." A flicker of something, annoyance, maybe concern, crossed the man's face. Well, people make mistakes, do stupid things. His hand hadn't moved from inside his jacket. "You mind if I take a look around your camp? Maybe he passed by while you were out." "My camp's back that way." Mike gestured in the opposite direction from where Tom was hidden. "But I should warn you. I get uncomfortable when people I don't know reach for hidden items at chest level." The man's eyes narrowed slightly, the pretense fading. "Just my phone. Going to call my partner." "Sure. Use your outside hand, though." For a long moment, neither man moved. Then the stranger made his choice, pulling out not a phone but a small black handgun. Mike was already moving. He closed the distance in 2 quick steps, deflecting the weapon to the side with his left hand, while his right delivered a precise strike to the man's wrist. The gun fell to the forest floor. Before the man could react, Mike had him face down, arm locked behind him. "Who sent you?" Mike demanded, keeping his voice low. "And don't bother lying. Your lost hiker story already failed." The man struggled briefly, then went still. "You have no idea what you're involved in. The guy you're protecting, he's a traitor. We're federal agents retrieving government property." Mike increased pressure slightly. Federal agents identify themselves, show credentials, don't hide in the woods with concealed weapons. He pulled something from the man's pocket, an ID card with no government markings, just a corporate logo he didn't recognize. Try again. A crackle came from the radio on the man's shoulder. Position 3, report. Have you found anything? The voice had a slight accent Mike couldn't place. Mike reached over and clicked the radio off. Position 3 can't come to the phone right now, he told his captive. And there's more than 2 of you. Interesting. Using the man's own belt and shoelaces, Mike secured him to a tree, tight enough to hold but not to injure. He placed a gag made from the man's bandana to keep him quiet. Your friends will find you eventually, Mike assured him, picking up the fallen weapon and removing its ammunition before tossing it into thick underbrush. But not soon enough to matter. Returning to Tom, Mike found him anxiously watching the trail. Relief washed over Tom's face when he recognized his protector. One down, Mike whispered. But he wasn't alone. There are at least 3 of them, maybe more. Tom closed his eyes briefly. They won't stop coming. They won't have to keep coming if we're not here. Mike checked his watch. Extraction team should be about 3 hours out now. We need to keep moving, find somewhere to hole up until they arrive. I can barely walk, Tom reminded him. Mike looked around, thinking quickly. Then we'll have to make sure they can't follow. The next 2 hours passed in a tense game of hide and seek through the forest. Mike helped Tom move from one hiding spot to another, never staying in one place long enough for the search teams to close in. They crossed a shallow stream, walking in the water for 50 yards to throw off any trackers. Mike fashioned a rough crutch from a sturdy branch to help Tom move more easily. Who are these people really? Mike asked as they rested in the shadow of a large fallen tree. That guy wasn't government. Tom wiped sweat from his forehead. Private contractors. The company I work for has government contracts, but also private investors. What we're developing, he hesitated. Let's just say it has applications beyond what was in the original scope. And you found out? Tom nodded. I was going to report it, had everything documented. Then my office was broken into, my home too, so I ran. A bitter laugh escaped him. Didn't run far enough, I guess. Before Mike could respond, a distant sound caught his attention. At first, he thought it was the wind, but it grew steadier, more mechanical. A rhythmic thumping that echoed off the mountains. Helicopter, Mike said, hope rising in his chest. That's our ride. But as the sound grew louder, Tom's expression darkened. Wait, listen to the engine pattern. That's not a military chopper. Mike listened more carefully. Tom was right. The sound was wrong for the type of helicopter Commander Reynolds would have sent. This was smaller civilian. They must have called in air support when they lost contact with their man, Mike realized. We need cover. Looking around frantically, Mike spotted a dense patch of pine trees about 100 yards away. There, the canopy will hide us from above. Half carrying Tom, Mike made for the trees as the helicopter sound grew louder. They had barely reached the edge of the pines when the black shape appeared over the ridge, sunlight glinting off its windshield. Down, Mike pulled Tom to the ground just inside the tree line. Through gaps in the branches, they watched the helicopter make a slow circle over the area. They won't find us under here, Mike reassured Tom, whose face had gone pale again, whether from pain or fear Mike couldn't tell. But we can't stay. That chopper's going to direct the ground teams right to this area. I can't keep running, Tom admitted, his voice strained. You should go. The extraction team will be looking for your beacon. Mike shook his head. Not happening. We stick together. The satellite phone in Mike's pocket vibrated. Pulling it out, he saw a text message. Extraction team 30 minutes out. Hold position. 30 minutes, Mike told Tom. We just need to hold out for 30 more minutes. But how? The helicopter was still circling, and through the trees, Mike could see figures moving in the distance, more search teams closing in. The pine grove wouldn't hide them for long. Just then, the satellite phone vibrated again. Another message. FLSHSIGNL when HEDLICOPTERPASSES DIRATTLI overhead. Mike looked at the phone in confusion. Flash signal. With what? Then he remembered. His old survival mirror, still tucked in his pack after all these years. He dug it out quickly, positioning it to catch the sunlight. "What are you doing?" Tom whispered. "Calling in the cavalry," Mike replied, watching the helicopter through the branches. "Someone's got a plan." When the helicopter made its next pass directly overhead, Mike angled the mirror to send a quick series of light flashes upward. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short, the old distress signal he'd been taught years ago. Nothing happened for a moment. Then, from somewhere far beyond the ridge, a new sound emerged. Different from the civilian helicopter, deeper, more powerful. The rhythmic thumping of military rotors. 2 massive shapes rose over the mountains, their dark forms blocking the sun momentarily. Military Black Hawks, moving with purpose and speed. The civilian helicopter veered sharply, obviously surprised by the new arrivals. One of the Black Hawks accelerated, positioning itself between the civilian craft and the ground below. The other swung wide, then descended rapidly toward the pine grove. Through the branches, Mike could see men fast roping down from the hovering Black Hawk, hitting the ground with practiced precision. They moved outward in a defensive perimeter, weapons ready but controlled. They wore the unmistakable gear of Special Operations Forces. "See?" Mike told Tom with a smile. "Told you help was coming." One of the soldiers spotted them and approached quickly. As he got closer, Mike recognized the face beneath the helmet, someone he hadn't seen in 3 long years. "Lieutenant Brown," Mike said, surprised. The soldier grinned. "Not anymore. It's Captain now." He looked at Tom, then back to Mike. "Looks like your vacation's over, sir. Ready to come back to work?" 1 week later, Mike sat in an office he never thought he'd see again. The walls were bare except for a few framed photographs and certificates. Through the window, he could see Washington, D.C. spread out below, a maze of buildings and monuments that seemed a world away from his mountain cabin. Across the desk, Commander Reynolds watched him with an expression Mike couldn't quite read. "The doctors say he'll make a full recovery," Reynolds said finally. "Thanks to you." Mike nodded. "Good, that's good. His real name is Dr. Thomas Chen, one of our top researchers in quantum computing. The work he's doing could change everything: energy production, communications, security. He mentioned something about his company going beyond the original scope." Reynolds' face darkened. That's putting it mildly. The private investors he mentioned, they were planning to sell his research to the highest bidder. When Tom figured it out and gathered evidence, they tried to silence him. The door opened and a man in a wheelchair rolled in. Tom, or Dr. Chen, looked much better than the last time Mike had seen him. Color had returned to his face and the haunted look in his eyes had faded. His leg was still heavily bandaged, but the infection was gone. "Mike," Tom said with a genuine smile, "they told me you were here. I wanted to thank you personally. Just glad you're okay." Tom wheeled closer. "You saved my life. And possibly a lot more than that." He glanced at Reynolds. "Has he told you everything?" "Some," Mike replied. "Enough to know you were right to run. The people chasing you have been apprehended," Reynolds added. "The company is under federal investigation. Your evidence was compelling." Tom nodded, then looked back at Mike. "What about you? What happens now?" It was the question Mike had been asking himself for days. After the rescue, he'd been debriefed, thanked, and offered a place to stay in Washington while things were sorted out. But what came next? "I've got a cabin waiting for me," Mike said. "Peace and quiet." Reynolds and Tom exchanged glances. "We have another option," Reynolds said, sliding a folder across the desk. "If you're interested." Mike didn't touch it. "I left that life behind." "Did you?" Tom asked quietly. "Because from where I'm sitting, those skills saved my life, and they could save others." Mike looked out the window, thinking. The truth was, something had awakened in him on that mountain. Not the violence or adrenaline he'd spent years trying to forget, but the purpose. The knowledge that his training could protect rather than harm. "We're not asking you to go back in the field," Reynolds clarified. "Not exactly. We need someone to train security teams for our research division. Someone who knows what they're up against. Someone who can think like them. And occasionally babysit stubborn scientists who don't follow security protocols." Tom added with a self-deprecating smile. Despite himself, Mike smiled too. "Sounds like a full-time job." "It is," Reynolds confirmed, "with an office nicer than this one. Housing allowance too, if you want it." Mike finally picked up the folder, opening it to scan the details. The terms were generous, the work meaningful. A new start, but one that honored his past rather than burying it. "I need time to think about it," he said. Of course, Reynolds stood, extending his hand. "Take all the time you need. But know this, what you did out there, that wasn't just luck or training. That was who you are." After saying goodbye, Mike left the building and walked along the National Mall. The afternoon sun glinted off the reflecting pool, tourists posing for photos in front of monuments to men who had served their country in different ways. His phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Tom. "Whatever you decide, I owe you dinner when this leg heals. And maybe a hiking lesson or two." Mike smiled, tucking the phone away. He thought about his cabin in the mountains, peaceful, quiet, and utterly empty most days. Then he thought about the folder in his hand, filled with possibilities. The path ahead wasn't clear yet, but for the first time in 3 years, he was looking forward rather than back. Sometimes the most unexpected trails led to exactly where you needed to be. And sometimes, helping a stranger on a mountain could end up saving you both. As he walked toward the sunset, Mike Adams made no decisions yet. But he walked with a purpose he hadn't felt in years. And for now, that was enough.